Well, and let's begin, and we'll let everyone sort of file in if they're running late as they come. But anyway, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is James Henderson, CEO of mindzie. mindzie is a company in the process intelligence space, operating North America, South America, Australia, all over Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Europe, providing process intelligence software to a wide range of industries. And today I have the pleasure of hosting a good friend and colleague, Dr. Owen Keates. And to keep it short, Dr. Owen Keates is a PhD as of recent in process mining and has been an expert in supply chain control towers, and a whole number of other business efficiency work. Hopefully that did you justice, Owen, but good afternoon, good morning.
Yeah, thanks very much, James, and thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Well, listen, for everyone that is joining or will join, this meeting is being recorded. So we'll share it out, just given time zones, so everyone can have an opportunity to watch down the road. But the premise of this is really just a fireside chat style webinar where Owen and I will just get to talk about some of the pressing topics that we're seeing across the globe when it comes to process intelligence and generally just business process improvement. And I thought, Owen, if it's okay to kick things off, it would be great to hear your thoughts on the whole process intelligence space. Why is it valuable to companies? How are people using it? And just generally what it is and where it's being applied.
Yeah, thanks, James. I think it's an emerging technology that sort of hit the market at the right time. And why I say that is there's an ever increasing need to get a deeper understanding of process and be able to have a view across all the data sources, all the business processes, in order to optimize, mitigate risk. And what we see now with process intelligence is it's enabled businesses to get a different lens on the performance of their processes, combine that with data, and provide deeper insights than have ever been seen before. And there are certain markets which we'll talk about soon, where it's really starting to become a key requirement across areas like healthcare, across financial services, broader supply chain, and so on. So it does give you a unique insight using legacy systems very often, and enables businesses to also predict performance of processes and proactively react to them.
Yeah, I appreciate that color commentary. And as I think about it, and honestly, Owen, the experience that I've had even talking with executives across the globe in any industry, as I said, healthcare, insurance, banking, manufacturing, supply chain, telecommunications, their focuses are always on how they can make their business better. But what I see at the executive level is sometimes there's a disconnect or almost an oversight that they forget that the foundation of how their business gets things done are these processes. And without these processes, the business doesn't work, right? And as I talk to executives about that, it's almost like a reminder that all of that college work and all those courses they've taken and all those MBAs all of a sudden pop back into their head and they say, oh, wait a minute, I completely forgot that it doesn't matter what industry, what you're looking at. We tend to think about it a lot when we talk about process improvement and processes in general as a manufacturing thing, right? They've always focused on process. We have to go step A, B, C, D, E, and make sure it's as efficient as possible. But as more and more people start to understand the art of the possible, right, which is where we're at today with this combination of technology and data, I think it's a good opportunity for more people to also shed light on the fact that it is beyond the manufacturing space, that their call center is a process, that how they shuffle paperwork is a process, that how they process an invoice is a process, that their warehouse follows a process. And to your point, Owen, I couldn't agree more that shining a lens on that business is really of the utmost importance, because that's how they go from um, assumptions, right, into what we like to call, especially in our world, the as is. What's really happening?
Look, I couldn't agree more. And I've seen some companies that have embraced this, like real exemplars of process awareness. They take it right from the top. So their strategic planning is a process that gets cascaded all the way through the business in a very rigorous way. Their tactical planning is a process. Their operational planning is a process. Their crisis planning and threat mitigation is a process. So, on the one, there are some who have the vision, but as you say, the vast majority of companies, I believe, don't regard business process, as a strategic imperative. It is a critical part of operations, but not a strategic imperative. And this all changes if things go wrong. For example, if a software update goes wrong, if there's a quality problem in manufacture and it goes wrong, or there's a service level failure in healthcare, suddenly process becomes a strategic imperative and everyone's speaking about it. So there's definitely a growing awareness, a growing process awareness that it must become strategic, and a much more proactive approach is required. And I think what I am seeing is somewhat like the rise of supply chain management during COVID. It too was one of those just critical operational processes, and it became a strategic imperative. Business process is rising up to that point. And there are probably some drivers. The one driver is pure competition and the risk mitigation aspect that's coming through. But I think another driver is the rise of AI, and we can talk obviously about that later. But those are drivers now that are causing a lot of interest in the space, and I believe it's really going to start taking off now.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating psychological experiment, right? It's almost like a Harvard business case study that you say, well, you see some companies who have been really successful in understanding their business process, figuring out how they can optimize that to the nth degree. And you see the direct correlation of that level of detail to the company's success, both top and bottom line. And yet there's still this gap of organizations and people who just don't think like that, right? Who talk about, well, but the business process doesn't fix my bottom line. The business process doesn't help us sell more. Well, the art is in the walk, right? Because it does, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But I, I think we are in an interesting time and space, because what we see on this side of the house, Owen, is you are right. There seems to be a significant, call it awakening, call it resurgence, whatever it is, but this significant desire to get back to the fundamentals and focus on things like, how do we optimize our business? And we know that comes down to process, but that's the fundamental statement. How do we work towards this concept of operational excellence? And I think we will talk about the AI, but we can go all day on that one. But I think there is this resurgence. And yet, when I speak with companies, when I talk to executives, when we engage with new clients, there still is this barrier of resistance to either process improvement, having a direct correlation or impact to the success of the business, and just as much a resistance on technology to help with that. But I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Is it a resistance to the technology itself, or is it this disbelief that focusing on process improvement really adds value?
Yeah, really good point. I've coined a phrase, not another system implementation syndrome, and there is a lot of fatigue out there in the larger corporations of every time a new system is implemented, it is a disruptive process. It requires a lot of change management, and one of the barriers is that that executives would see a process intelligence solution as a big system implementation, and clearly it's not. I think one of the ways to get around that barrier is to explain it's really an application. It's an application that can sit above all the legacy systems. In fact, it requires the data inputs from those legacy systems to be even more valuable, and that it provides insights that often have never been seen before because the legacy systems have their own databases. You're able to explore it from a process perspective. So that's certainly one of the areas, and another area is that presenting the outcomes as in a way that makes sense to the CEO and the executive from a financial delivery perspective. I was in a meeting with several health professionals recently, and one of the executives had led a digital transformation. And to his peers, and this is often the most difficult sell when you see someone selling to peers, he first presented the value to the hospital. The hospital has saved X million. Everyone looked up, and he then went on later to explain the how. But just the value delivery it gained everyone's attention. You could literally see people, get up in their seats and pay attention. So I think that is one of the ways to also get through these barriers, look at the value, be able to translate that into real dollars over time, real bottom line impacts. And then you can slowly walk back as to the how. Often I've had many cases where we've done big process improvement exercises, and you have the impressive process chart on the wall. Sometimes execs have come up and said, wow, great, I didn't know we had that particular element in our business. But all that is a bit of so what in their minds. It is, what is the value? So I think that's the way, promote this type of process intelligence as purely an application, sits above, and it delivers bottom line value.
And I want to come back to the selling to executives, and I shouldn't even call it selling to executives, but educating executives on the value, because it is there, but sometimes they need the walk, as I said earlier. But you said something interesting that I want to double click on, which is they look at it as a major implementation. And I think, to your point, it doesn't have to be, and I would almost argue so much as it shouldn't be.
Correct.
When I look at this type of technology, people say, well, to your point, why do we need another system? We have lots of systems. Why do we need another system? I said this to an executive I was having a conversation with the other day, and I said, if you have a screw that needs to be put into a wall, do you go grab your hammer? And they said, no, of course not. I grab the screwdriver, because you grab the purpose-built tool for the task that you need to accomplish. And it's the same reason you don't grab the screwdriver to put in a nail, or at least you shouldn't, right? Because you grab the tool that is designed for that purpose. And you shouldn't be afraid that if that is the task that needs to be accomplished, to go get a screwdriver or to go buy a hammer, right? Yes, it's a bit of a distraction. Yes, you got to run down to the hardware store, but that investment pays off in spades when you have to put in 10 screws, when you have to drive in 10 nails. And I look at this the same way, and I think when we look at it for different companies, I would say when you talk about general business process improvement, it pays off the most for businesses of scale or that are scaling, right? The bigger the business, the more complex the process is, the more meat there is on the bone. But even mid-sized organizations have a huge opportunity to leverage that efficiency. And they, in either circumstance, should not look at this as a monumental, and I'm even going to be so bold as to say complete organizational transformation. Because once you go down that path, the scope becomes so large and so complex that you can't see the forest through the trees. Right into my home, then you hire a general contractor, a designer, a plumber, right? And you go all the way down. And it's not that you can't get there, but you don't need to start there, right? And thinking of process intelligence technology as a tool to enable a task that doesn't have to be this grand vision, but can start with something as basic as we got to put this screw into a wall, I think really changes the way that it's perceived and allows these organizations to start small and grow into their own success. And that statement, Owen, will dovetail us into the other thing that you mentioned that I want to click on a little bit here, which is helping executives, whoever the individual that's going to be involved in signing off on budget, how do we help them understand the value and translate this value or this concept of, hey, I'm going to improve how the business runs. And realistically, if I think about it in that perspective, it should have self-evident intrinsic value. The business runs better. We're more efficient. We're better at what we do. But in a lot of places in the world, people don't see that. So how do you help translate that concept into one of those glorious crown jewels of executive priority?
Well, I think there's two pathways. The one is on the business improvement side, where really important to pick an area, go for the low-hanging fruit, and be able to prove in a very short period of time that a deep analysis of process leads to a deeper understanding, and of course the opportunity to optimize that process. And if you start in the right area at the right scale, the actual implementation is pretty simple. It can be data on a CSV file that gets ingested and then runs through the process intelligence algorithms, and insights are produced pretty quickly. And then there's another area, which is also the threat mitigation and risk mitigation side, in that there are so many use cases. I mean, almost on a weekly basis, we hear about another process failure that leads to a major impact to a business. And that angle is one that I think should also be promoted, in that you're able to monitor processes and ensure compliance. And we can double click a little later into this, but that ensures that processes that businesses think are running smoothly are often not running smoothly. And one of the first discoveries that you find from a process mining exercise is, out of those 1,000 transactions or 10,000 transactions, how many actually followed the required regulatory process. And very often, you then find it's those 10 or 15% that did not. And those are the ones that can often cause a lot of harm to a business. So I think it's both angles, this compliance checking, which let's discuss a little bit later, as well as the being able to just analyze those processes and provide those deeper insights. And it's the one thing about process intelligence solutions is they give a very powerful visualization as well. You're able to drill down to anyone who's doubting the source of the data. You can drill down to the event and prove, this is real data from your business, from your department, and this is the outcome. This is how it's impacting the performance of your department and your customer's department.
No, I think that's without a doubt correct. When I think about operational excellence, right? The first thing that comes to most people's minds is a cost out exercise, right? We can help the bottom line. We can drive more to the bottom line. We can scale with the resources we have. We can, increase our margins. We can do all these great things to the bottom line if we become better at what we do, in general speaking. But I will go so bold as to say I was on a call just the other day with a customer of ours who's a leasing company. And the general premise is they have something that they lease out for other people to use. And they were curious around how could process intelligence affect their business. And specifically, they thought they had a problem in their supply chain. But they're like, how do we justify the investment? And I said, well, I think you're thinking about the problem wrong, right? Let's not go ground up. Let's think top down. And the top down is you have these things that you lease out to somebody else. When that thing is broken or needs to be repaired, you are not making money from it. What impacts your ability to get that thing back out making money again is your supply chain, right? You need the parts to come in, you need to fix the thing, and you need to get it back out where it's making you money. The reality is you think of your supply chain as a cost center, but it's actually a direct correlation to revenue. And the faster you get these parts to where they need to be, the faster these things get back out in the market, and the faster they're producing. So it's really more a matter of how many broken things do you deal with a year? How much does it cost you per day that we're down? And how many days can we shave off your supply chain to reduce that? And a direct eye-opening to your point about your experience in the healthcare space, Owen, a direct eye-opener, almost jaw-dropping, when they saw how many millions of dollars that portion of their internal, what they thought was just a cost center process, could increase their top line. It was just a monumental expectation. And I think, as I look at even my experience, Owen, and I'll ramble here for a second on you, of operating a business. The reality is businesses are complex. And, sometimes people bash their head up against the wall saying, why didn't the executive sign off on this? How do they not understand? And it's not always the case that they don't understand from experience. I think part of it is also the case that there are only so many things that you can set as strategic priorities. There is an art in a business that you can have a million ideas, but if you release them too quickly into the business, it's like a manufacturing line, and all of a sudden everything just bunches up and you just can't do it. The business doesn't have the capacity to take on everything. So they have to set strategic priorities, right? This is our priority for this year, this quarter, whatever it is. And I think a bit of the art, but I'd love your thoughts before we go on to compliance here, and I make sure I don't ramble too long. A bit of the art is to help translate the strategic priorities and how the process impacts them. I'd love to hear your opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a company, I'll name them because it has been published, Zespri, who are the global distributors of kiwi fruit out of New Zealand, with hundreds of distribution organizations throughout the world. And one of the things that they did almost a decade ago is they just took process as a strategic component of their business. As they expanded into multiple countries, they needed to ensure that process was at the forefront and that adjustments were made as they went into different regions with different regulations. But what was so important and interesting to see is they took it from strategy downwards. They made sure that everything the business did had a process owner, and that value was captured. And it was so interesting to see the growth and expansion of this company who took process as an absolute strategic imperative. I've also worked with mining companies that realize the complexity, understand that supply chain can be disrupted so easily, understand that the whole process of mining and beneficiation and supply chain is a whole lot of cogs connected together. But they developed a process where before they started any improvement, they would do an estimate of the value that would be captured. And they would get managers to sign off and say, do we all agree that this is the potential value to be captured? And once everyone agreed, they then got into the process analysis and got into the business process and were always measured against those goals. So that's a way, both from the mining and Zespri's perspective, that's a way to manage it. And it's certainly the way to help other organizations become process aware, make sure they're process owners, make sure value is at the forefront of anything they do before they start, and then run through an engagement like that.
No, thanks for that, Owen. And I'm going to try and keep us on time, but before we jump into the never-ending rabbit hole that is AI these days, you mentioned something else, which is compliance. And it's interesting when we look at businesses in general, you do have this operations perspective in terms of the process lifeblood. But people do often forget about internal audit and compliance. And it is and can be a very, very challenging exercise. One, to keep up with. Two, because there's not a lot of tools that are great at doing it. And three, because the mistakes, as you've pointed out, can be extremely costly. You know, you look at some of the financial institutions on the US side, and you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars in fines. It is just a very, very sensitive subject. And as we talk about process intelligence, obviously, efficiency comes to mind and operational excellence comes to mind. But I think it's overlooked quite a bit in terms of the compliance angle and how that is almost essential for a lot of these highly regulated industries. But love to hear some more thoughts on the whole idea of process intelligence and applications in compliance.
Yeah, and I think here there's also two different levels. You know, there is the areas such as financial services and legal and food safety and the other quality type areas, banking, where there is internal audit and there's strict requirement to comply. Here, process intelligence can play a very, very important role. You're able to create what I call a process-aware digital twin or a standard template. This is the regulatory process. You're able to create that and then use process intelligence to check all of these critical processes against that standard. It does it all the time. It can scale to millions of transactions, and it's able to flag when certain processes are not following the regulatory pathway. And these process intelligence solutions have matured to the point you can start putting prediction and prescription onto that as well. There's then another layer, which is not as the hard regulatory component, but just the more general process standardization, where there's no internal audit. But back to the mining example, what was clear there was in certain teams were not following the same process, and that was causing one team to outperform the other. And it's only when you're able to go down and come up with a standard operating procedure which can be tracked, or you're able to coach and guide the underperforming teams and use the good performing teams to help even develop further, train their colleagues, but also help standardize the processes. So there's a growing area of the so-called process-aware digital twin that can be the gold standard and can help elevate processes throughout an organization with a lighter touch of compliance to that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting going beyond just the data sensitive and highly regulated industries. To your point, Owen, can add a lot of value. I think in the highly regulated industries, it's pretty obvious. I was doing some homework the other evening and with a colleague who's in and around financial service, and they showed me a stat that it was something like $6.6 billion in fines were doled out in North America for compliance issues. Billion, right? And that's just one, but I think to a certain degree, and to your point, before we move on, Owen, some organizations look at that and say, well, that's not my industry, right? We don't have those heavy regulations. But then they forget that driving and monitoring process standardization and understanding your process helps you understand what is the most effective way to do it in our organization. And that in and of itself drives efficiency and has a number of other tangible benefits as they move along.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, listen, we're going to run out of time here quick, and I don't think we have the full hour, but I would be remiss not to pick your brain while I have you here, Owen, and just get your thoughts on this whole AI arms race. I don't think you can read a newspaper, a blog, talk to anybody these days without somebody saying the word AI. And as we see this AI arms race, where does process intelligence sit as these organizations look at how do we, put bluntly, and I'm sure we've all heard it, how do we AI it?
Yeah, very, very interesting point. A couple of months ago, I was at the Gartner IT Symposium, and Gartner were actually calling out AI as being in the trough of disillusionment. So a lot of statistics around the spend on AI to date and the failure of AI projects. Even last week, I was shown stats around the very low percentage of prototypes, AI prototypes that are actually going into more production. And at the same time, we see the billions being spent on AI infrastructure and in many cases, AI implementations. So I think the one area which everyone's becoming aware of is that AI needs an appropriate use case. So I'm going to rephrase this. A lot of businesses really pushed to get AI done without considering what the problem was or the opportunity. Certainly AI is bringing opportunity. And unless you start with that, what is the problem or what is the opportunity? And then work through the processes around the problem or opportunity, you end up back to the your analogy of a hammer and a screw. you end up trying to force an AI solution into a business. And I believe that's where a lot of the failure has occurred. AI requires a deep understanding of the surrounding processes, a deep understanding of the data quality, the sources of data. And there's been a definite surge in interest around process intelligence being that enabler to understanding that landscape. If you have identified an opportunity for AI, make sure you apply process mining exercise to fully understand the processes, the data quality. And from then on, use process intelligence to also help manage those agents. These agents require guardrails and governance. There's been so many examples of an AI agent just being let free and coming up with non-productive outcomes. Being able to use more deterministic processes to set up the guardrails, to fully understand them, to monitor them, and then contain the AI agent in a specific area with judges or the various techniques now being used to manage and monitor the outcomes. That's the way to successful implementation. So I certainly predict a huge uptake in process intelligence in enabling AI into the future.
You know, it's interesting, Owen, I just dovetail on that. So I was talking with our CTO, and he had a great analogy, and I love analogies. But he said AI is like having a junior employee right out of college. Are they skilled? Yes. Would you give them the keys to the kingdom and let them go run amok in your insurance process, in your banking process, your manufacturing process? No. And if you don't understand how things should be done and have that structure in place, you can't let this AI run and do things. You need to have those guardrails. And to your point, AI needs the training, which in this case is the business context. It's the process. It's how does the business work in order for it to be effective. If you don't teach it and give it that information and put those guardrails on, then it is inevitably going to end up in the state that we see today, which is failed project after failed project, made up responses, bad choices. And it really almost is no different than a junior employee. People look at it as artificial intelligence. It should do everything. Well, it's great at 70%, but it's that last 30% that is the devil in the details. And I would almost, from what I'm seeing, Owen, and we'll probably have to wrap this up here in a second, but from what I'm seeing, I would almost go so far as to say that those failed AI initiatives are an eye-opener for every business, that there is no magic wand, right? We want to reduce costs. We want to drive efficiency. There is no simple thing that is going to do that. It is a complex task that takes work. And that work starts, in my opinion, with doing the basics and the most important fundamental things and building from there, which is make sure your business runs as well as possible. Make sure you continue to monitor to ensure that it stays running as well as possible. Then layer on your next level of initiatives. And it's only then, I think, that we will see AI go from this trough of disillusionment back to where it belongs, which is a huge enabler for organizations. Now, with that, Owen, we're going to get tight on time here, but is there any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the group out here?
Look, I think it was a great summary that you presented now. And just to go back on a couple of points, as you've said, businesses are complex. Business processes are complex. Data is complex. And to implement AI is going to require a very deep understanding of all of that. And certainly the methodology around process intelligence gives a way of doing this, a pathway of doing this that is relatively easy to implement and to scale. So I certainly encourage all businesses to look at the capability, because I think they will be very surprised. And thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Owen. As always, my friend, greatly appreciate your time and your commentary. We'll get this video shared out for anyone who needs it. And when we do, we'll also make sure and share out some contact information. Owen does do a lot of work in and around business process improvement and process advising. So we'll make sure that all of our contact information is shared out. And thank you, my friend. It was a pleasure as always.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.